Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 9th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Quinnipiac University and a brand new poll they released from the Battleground state of Wisconsin, which stands in direct contrast with a lot of the data that we've been seeing out of some of the national and statewide figures, states like Georgia and Arizona and North Carolina, that have been pretty much dominating the media narrative that Donald Trump is the undeniable expected winner of this upcoming presidential election. A lot of the conversation has largely been about how President Biden has lost support from the last election, but Quinnipiac University seems to put a full stop on that narrative here, especially in a state where Joe Biden seems to be performing the best out of all of the battleground states. Quinnipiac University's new poll shows Donald Trump losing to Joe Biden by a 6-point margin here. Joe Biden leading a two-way race and then leading a five-way race with other candidates on the ballot. As I said, Quinnipiac University is alone in this characterization, and I absolutely acknowledge before this video really gets started here that this poll itself may in fact be an outlier. But I have reason to believe that it does capture in at least part of the sentiment that we have been seeing in the state of Wisconsin that has been very much consistent since the start of this campaign season. In down-ballot races, Democrats tend to do very, very well, whether that's congressional races, Senate races. We've even seen past elections in the past year with Supreme Court elections that show Wisconsin is far from being a state that is dominated by a right-wing ideology. Even in this election right now, Democrats lead the generic ballot in the state of Wisconsin, especially in their competitive Senate and House races here, and altogether Democrats seem to be performing a lot better than the suggested, what might be suggested by the mainstream press here. So in this video, we are going to be unpacking the Quinnipiac University poll here that shows Joe Biden with a 6-point advantage. I think it has a unique point of interest too, given that Quinnipiac University rarely ever does poll the state of Wisconsin, and the last time they did wasn't even in 2022. It was the 2020 presidential election when they said that Donald Trump would in fact win the state by 7 points. I think it stood, again, not only in direct contrast with what we've been seeing across the national in Wisconsin in this race, but also because in 2020, it stood in direct contrast with what the polls were suggesting, saying that Donald Trump would win. And the standard argument and convention from the Republican Party has long been that polls underestimate Republicans, polls underestimate Trump. And yet in 2020, Quinnipiac University said he would do about 8 points better than he actually did. And so that sort of throws that argument out the window here that Quinnipiac University is sourcing or fishing for a certain type of answer when it comes down to the state of Wisconsin. Fundamentally, they have a track record that isn't the best in terms of predicting the overall outcome, but certainly doesn't skew in one way or the other. Now, I also want to say at the very beginning of this too, I do not think Joe Biden will win the state of Wisconsin by 6 points. I have been very consistent in a lot of my predictions here that I do expect Donald Trump to have a significantly better chance at winning Wisconsin than he did in 2020. But the question is, does he actually win it? I think this new poll here suggests that there absolutely is an appetite to re-elect President Biden, but that he's falling behind many of the mainstream Democrats, again, House, congressional elections, that really do make a difference. There are voters out there that are voting Democrat down ballot, but refusing to vote for President Biden when it comes down to the presidential level. And so we'll unpack that when we take a look at the Senate race here, when we take a look at urgent issues for voters in the state, when we take a look at things like a job approval rating, or even just simply who's better on issues that are important to voters, like abortion, immigration, the economy, etc. And so we'll talk about that as we go through this poll here, and I think it will reveal some very interesting findings that might suggest exactly how Joe Biden has this 6-point advantage and what is a priority to voters versus not, especially if you are in a media echo chamber where a lot of the conversation has largely been driving around the border and the economy, when evidently there are voters out there that care about issues beyond that. And so the high-level takeaway is Biden leads in a two-way race, he leads in a five-way race, but what's interesting is Biden and Trump on the issues. And again, might indicate some motivational factors for why voters are voting the way they do. Starting off strong for President Biden, he leads on the issue of abortion 54-36. On the issue of preserving democracy in the United States, President Biden's lead decreases 51-42. Now, this is where President Trump starts to do better. On international conflicts, 48-47, the response to Israel, the Hamas war in Gaza, 45-43, the economy, 52-44, and immigration, 51-43. And yet, President Biden leads. I think this first comes in to say that the fact is, while the average voter may absolutely care about issues like the economy and immigration and international conflicts, it doesn't seem to be the driving motivational factor for why these voters vote the way they do. Otherwise, Donald Trump would be in the advantage. The way Donald Trump wins this election, and he knows this, Republicans, Democrats all know this, is that if the election is solely and only about things like the economy, immigration, and that's pretty much it. President Biden's decrease in support when it comes down to what's happening in Israel and Palestine, 45 to 43, that's something they absolutely are taking into account. But they know that in terms of public perception, at least based on polling data today, the American public does seem to side with President Trump more than President Biden on issues like the economy and immigration. However, the question here isn't who are they supporting on that front, but rather what matters to them when they get to the ballot box. And so we'll explore that a little bit later, but it is very clear here, I think you can even guess just based on the numbers we are seeing, that maybe it isn't just the economy. Maybe it isn't just immigration, and that maybe Republicans, while are campaigning on issues that certainly matter to them, it may not matter to everyone the same way. When it comes down to the U.S. Senate race, I think this shows just exactly how powerful the Democratic Party can and would be in Wisconsin without any type of national baggage that we largely see with President Biden. Tammy Baldwin is the incumbent Democrat here. She won her last race in 2018 by actually a smaller margin than she is predicted to right now against her Republican challenger, but the margin here is roughly 12 points. A very substantial margin, a margin that is identical when it comes down to how independent voters are voting, and it's a good thing for Tammy Baldwin. She is a popular Democratic senator, and the numbers clearly show that. Now, on topics like campus protests and most urgent issue and the economy, I want to group this all together because I think it really goes to show exactly what is happening here. As I was saying, the economy tops the list in terms of the most urgent issue for voters. 20% follow, immigration. Preserving democracy is roughly 20%. I want us to think about it for a moment, though. For voters who their number one issue is the economy, chances are these are Republicans. For voters whose issues right now are immigration, especially in a state like Wisconsin, chances are those are Republicans. You see, I think Republicans have put themselves in a position where they're looking at things like this very high-level takeaway of the most urgent issue to voters in a state, and they're running with it. They're seeing the economy. They're seeing immigration. But fundamentally, the voters who are already saying that are more likely than not to already be backing Republicans. Why else would somebody from Wisconsin think of immigration as their number one issue if they already didn't have an opinion on the topic? And clearly, based on what we're seeing in the head-to-head matchups here, those who support Donald Trump in issues like the economy and immigration probably, too, are going to be those who are most inspired to label that as some of their top issues. And so what we're finding here is that, when it comes down to what is pressing for the average voter in the state of Wisconsin, it actually isn't a lot of things that you might expect it to be. In things like issue of abortion, it may not be the prevalent number one issue for voters in the state, but it absolutely matters and is absolutely part of the calculus that we see voters conduct when it comes down for deciding who to vote for. And so I certainly caution you and taking away from simply just asking what is the most urgent issue, because a lot of the time it is Republicans and right-leaning independents that answer things like immigration, like the economy, and it isn't a real indicator of what the state actually thinks. Now, the final thing I want to take away from this poll before we get into further analysis also is job approval rating. That in terms of President Biden, he has a negative 39 to 58% job approval rating, meaning that just 39% of voters here approve of the job he's doing, and 58% disapprove. And yet, in this state, you find that he leads Donald Trump 50 to 44. 50 to 44. With an approval rating of 39% and a disapproval rating of 58%, President Biden wins. And so when I see things like that, it really calls into question the Republican Party's ability to organize and win in this state. Now, don't get me wrong. Donald Trump leads on the average in Wisconsin by 0.5%. But let this Quinnipiac University poll, one of the very few to show anybody in the majority with the exception of Marquette showing Donald Trump at 51 and CBS News showing Donald Trump at 50, these numbers here are good for President Biden in contrast with a lot of the other states that we're seeing. Given that as well, I would also like to say that what we have seen when it comes down to recent election history in Wisconsin, when it comes down to support in 2020, 2018, even 2016, Wisconsin has never been this state that is over-enthusiastic for Donald Trump. He did significantly better than Mitt Romney did, much, much better than John McCain did, and he was able to do something that Republicans haven't been able to do since 1984, and that was flip Wisconsin red. But I will say that Republicans might be missing the mark on a state like this one. Although the polls might suggest that Donald Trump is in the lead, I often remember that in 2022 they suggested that Republicans would win the governorship. Did they? No. They lost by 3 points and the polls were wrong by roughly 4. In the Senate race in Wisconsin, I distinctly remember that Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes was supposed to lose the state by 6, 7, 8 points, at least according to the polls. What happened was that he lost by roughly 2. Wisconsin has a history, though. In 2020, it absolutely overestimated Joe Biden, but then in 2022, it did something that none of us were really expecting. It underestimated the Democrats. And this time around, we could genuinely see something very similar happen, especially given that you're talking about very similar pollsters from the last race. But Quinnipiac is relatively new. Their last poll conducted in this state was in 2020, in a head-to-head matchup against none other than Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But moving on since then, Quinnipiac University really has not touched the state. And so it was fascinating to see that in their first open debut here, despite saying Trump would win by 7 in the last race, they say Biden wins by 6. It'll be very interesting to see what these results are, but every single thing matters. And that's because this electoral college map here, we aren't really working with 538 electoral votes. We're working in reality with 87 to 90. Very few amounts of electoral votes that dictate the entire future of our democracy, the entire future of this nation here. And Wisconsin could be crucial for that if Democrats are looking at their pathway to victory. Because Donald Trump can win in Arizona. He can win in Georgia. He can win in North Carolina. But as long as Democrats have Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, they win the presidency. Joe Biden wins the presidency and can even afford to lose a state like New Hampshire, can even afford to lose a state like Nevada if they're winning New Hampshire. There are so many possible, opportunities here for Democrats to win in 2024. And I find it fascinating that looking at where we are in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, despite being the states that turned their backs on Hillary Clinton in 2016, are where Democrats are actually doing the best when it comes down to a head-to-head matchup. And on that first point I made about down ballot races with Democrats doing quite well, I think you can also see it outside of Wisconsin. In states like Michigan, where Elisa Slotkin leads by a point when Joe Biden is down by 2. In Pennsylvania, where Bob Casey leads by 5 points, where Joe Biden is down by 1. These states show what Democrats are capable of when they have less scandals and when they're more liked and respected. Joe Biden can get back to that. He was as unpopular, slightly more popular actually, than he was today and is today back in June, July of 2020. It was a reversion in identity, a reversion in public perception of Joe Biden that won him that election in 2020. At the time at which he was unpopular, it's very clear, given what we know now about that election, that he probably wouldn't have won if he was still unpopular. The Democratic Party, quite frankly, knows what they're doing. And what we see out of these states and states like Wisconsin, especially with polls like this one, it reaffirms what we have known for a while. While it may be perceived largely as an outlier, we know things about the states that polls simply can't predict. We know that they were wrong in 2022 in a number of battleground states, including states like Michigan, where Gretchen Whitmer was supposed to win by 1, yet she won by 11. In Pennsylvania, where Dr. Oz was supposed to win by 1, but John Fetterman won by 5. In states like Wisconsin, where Tim Michels was supposed to be the next Republican governor, and yet Tony Evers ended up winning re-election as the Democratic governor. These states have a track record recently that completely dispel the rumor that there is only a left-wing bias when it comes down to polls. It is clear and has been clear from the beginning that Joe Biden's pathway to victory will not be easy, but it is obvious at which strategy he should and probably will take. This isn't to say that the campaign won't focus on other battleground states, and I absolutely think they should. But fundamentally, it is polls like this one that reaffirm the idea that it is these states that are worth the most investment. That it is these states that led to the decision to hold a Democratic convention in the Midwest, in Chicago, Illinois. There is a reason why the RNC exists in a city like Milwaukee, because these are the prizes that Republicans are afraid Democrats are going to get, and Democrats know that they are going to do quite well in these states given the numbers that they are seeing. Not to say that the cause shouldn't and can't be fought for further, but at the end of the day, the Democratic Party is in such a unique position. President Biden is in such unique position where he can win the election by the skin of his teeth through states that are reliable for Democrats down the ballot, and some of the data that we are seeing suggests that it might be reliable up the ballot for the presidential race as we get closer and closer to election season. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist from my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.